Alright guys, so today we're gonna take a look at the new Fragment champion that is currently in the game. Is it worth going for NOLDUA if you're on a free-to-play account? Is that a hero that you can really use in the late game? Is she somebody that you can utilize just in general, or should you actually skip that? So we're gonna go over the skills a little bit, take a quick look at her, explore maybe a few options as well, and then we can judge whether or not it's worth it going for her. So with that being said and done, let's jump straight in and take a closer look. So NOLDUA is a support champion. We have her as a force champion also, and she's part of the Dark Elves. So one of the immediate things obviously that comes to mind when you're looking at her is the question of whether or not she's good for faction wars. And there is actually a little bit of a complicated question, because there's a couple of alternatives on the Dark Elf side that might be better choices for you that you might already have. But generally speaking, she's also a champion that is obviously comboing off well. So if you have Solana the Gleaming, which is a Void champion, then she has certain combo effects with him. And right off the bat, if you have the two of them, the pair is incredible. So definitely something where if you have one, you would love to have the other. Solana is a lot stronger just in general than she is. But again, the combo between the two of them is pretty awesome. So this is one of those things that is a bit of a hook, because on the one hand, you know, you don't want to pull the Void champion and then miss out on her, but the question is always, does that offset her being maybe not strong enough on her own to really go for her right now? So that's a question that everybody has to answer for themselves. For me personally, for the main account, for example, where I have the resources, is always a thing where I say, okay, if I have a champion like this, if I can go for her without investing too many resources, it's probably worth it. Now we're going to focus a little bit more on her as an individual champ, but once again, if you actually get Solana, you kind of want her too, so keep that in mind when you make your decision of what actually to go for here. So the first thing here that you already have is obviously her passive, where all turn meter filler effects on the enemy side are less effective. That's actually kind of neat. That might be something that in certain circumstances you could even use in arena. Now typically with 4 slots on every single arena team, you have a lot of champions battling for those positions, but technically speaking, especially if you have Solana as well, then you can obviously utilize the both of them. But it's a neat little passive. It's something that chips a bit in. What's more important is when we're looking at her A3. So she's actually somebody that is a reviver. You get all of your allies revived with 50% HP, 50% turn meter, and you are placing a shield on everybody that is based off her max HP. So that's already pretty good, and this is one of the things that becomes instantly important, because if you have a free-to-play account, there is actually a chance that you don't have revivers that are all that great. You might have a couple, you might have an epic that can revive a couple of people. Maybe you're currently operating with a reliquary tender still and you're using a rare. But a lot of times when you're looking into an early account or into a free-to-play account, having a variety of revivers can be really strong. Especially when we're talking faction wars, when we're talking Cursed City, and also of course with the Grim Forest now, where you have certain restrictions on what champions you pull. So that can actually become big if you have multiple options there. Now, generally speaking, when we're looking at her A2, this is something that I personally actually kind of like, because you have a buff stripper now. As you can see, there's also a lot of secondary effects that just kick in once that you have Solana. So as I mentioned before, there is a lot of comboing going on here. But you have a decreased defense on the other side, which is fairly nice. And then obviously you have a chance that is at 100% if fully booked, where you can strip the opponent's buffs. Now, I personally really like that. This is an A2 where a lot of people might argue, okay, it's not really worth it. Having a buff stripper, on the other hand, in my eyes, is really nice. I like that a lot. You can use that in arena a ton, but there's also lots and lots of stages when you're going through the Grim Forest, when you're going to the Cursed City, where having a buff stripper is actually pretty amazing. So this is something that will end up on a 3-turn cooldown if fully booked. If you look at the A2, it needs 4 books. If you're looking at the A3, it needs 2. So she's not all that hungry when we're talking about books in general, which I actually like quite a lot. Then we have the A1. And here we have basically just a chance to apply a weaken and an enfeeble, which is kind of nice. Only attacks a single enemy. It's nothing crazy. If you're targeting a single enemy there, it's neat. But obviously her strength lies more in her ability to revive, and then in her A2, which just strips buffs in general. Now, in addition to that, we also have an accuracy aura that you can use, which is quite nice. And it makes her all in all a pretty well-rounded champion. She's not something that immediately like stands out, again, except if you have Solana too, but she is fairly solid. Now, does she completely knock my socks off here? Not really. We don't have a lot of reviews for her, but you can see that it's pretty mid. But this is really where it comes down on where you are in the game. If you are in the late game and you have tons of revivers, she is most likely not going to be your top choice. Just matter of fact. If, on the other hand, you are currently not in the late game yet and you still need a good reviver that has maybe also that buff strip here, then this becomes a very different story. So all of a sudden she becomes quite nice. If you have a blind seer, that's typically someone on the faction side, on the Dark Elf faction, that most people would actually prefer. So in this case, you have also the block damage on the revive that you get on your A3, and then you have a heal coming in too, which she is missing. So she doesn't have a heal, which is a little bit of an issue. You're placing a shield also with your A3, but that's it. Now, to be fair, Blind Seer is a lot more book hungry. You need a few more books than you do with her. But still, generally speaking, if you have both, you would probably lean towards her instead of going for Noldua. But again, it depends on where you are in the game. I personally think that if you are lacking a lot of good revivers and you still need a couple of supports, maybe you don't have a buff stripper yet that is very reliable, then she is a good option. This is not really an event where you need to invest tons of resources. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to invest anything, and if you have a free-to-play account, you might find yourself in a situation, you know, where you have to really just calculate, can I actually go for her? I will get her on my main account simply because I expect that at some point I have a good shot of getting Solana himself, and I don't want to end up in a position where I get him and don't have her, and I have the resources to spare. There's also a couple of missions that I currently have to do for Marios, and they are really annoying, so I need to farm tons of dungeons because I need mythical items, which means that all of those dungeon quests to get the fragments are basically a non-brainer for me anyways. I will do them no matter what. So that plays into that role a little bit. We can also take a bit of a look at the schedule here, of course, but my personal recommendation would really be look at your own lineup, think a bit about what you have. A lot of the revivers that you get early on, for example, if you have Rector Drath, they have a single revive, so that doesn't really help you too much if you have multiple allies that just died. So having just an all-team revive with that shield is super neat, and then I really like a buff stripper. Now, obviously, there will be other people that, for example, tell you, hey, if you have to start stripping buffs, then you might already be on the losing end of the battle anyways. It's better to control your opponent's team by A, being faster, and then applying stuns, freezes, and whatnot to control them, and that's totally true. But you will end up, in my opinion, at least in a lot of situations where this A2 can be super useful and really helpful, and for me, that's kind of a big thing. It is a little bit similar to what you get from Madame Saris, obviously. So in a lot of the old school speed combos that you utilized in Arena, you would start with Arbiter, then have a debuff strip and try to apply also the debuffs on the opponent. And in this case, obviously, she could take that role too. So you can utilize her in PvE, you can utilize her in PvP. I think she's a very solid option if you don't have better choices. If you have a late game account or a mid game account where you already have 5-6 revivers and you're just looking at this and like, it doesn't really cut it. Especially if you have a reviver on the Dark Elf side for Faction Wars, then you don't really need her. But I would say that most of the people that just start into the game, they don't have somebody that can reliably revive and keep the team alive in Faction Wars, so that makes it already a decent option, and if then you need her in other areas of the game as well, then even more so. So my general recommendation would be, it's a little bit situational, but I think even though she is not going to be a champion that you're going to use in the late game all the time, unless you're pulling her counterpart, I think she's still worth it. The resources are kind of there, so I personally will at least get her on my main account. Here we have the calendar for the entire events that are connected to her. So the good news is that when it comes to her, it's just straight up fragments that you're getting. So you don't have to play around a fusion and upgrade other champions. So I personally think these are a lot easier to accomplish. But of course, you have to still judge for yourself whether or not you have the resources to pull it off. But this at least gives you a bit of an idea on what exactly you have to go for if you want to claim her. Now, she is, as I already said, a solid choice, especially for players that maybe do not have a proper reviver just yet. For Faction Wars, she's probably going to be fairly useful. And yeah, based on that, you kind of have to think a bit about if it's worth it for you or not. Even though she isn't the strongest, I think what you have to invest here and what you get back is worth it. So the reward is there. I'll go for her. But again, at the end of the day, you have to decide for yourself. So Guys, what do you think? Is anybody else trying to make a player for her? Are you skipping her? Do you think she's not really worth it? Or what are the thoughts here? Let me know. Drop a comment in the comment sections. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video if you made it this far. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.